Hello and welcome. Fraud and intimidation allegations are already rampant in the race for the White House. Early voting in key swing states, as they're known in the US, has resulted in long lines and legal challenges are brewing. The Republican Party is crying foul as the community-based organization known as ACORN deals with links to a series of fraudulent voter registrations. The Democrats claim that no actual fraud has been committed and accuse their opponents of trying to intimidate poor and black voters. Well, adding to all of this are the still unresolved concerns over the integrity of electronic voting and whether or not voters have been wrongly removed from election rolls. And America still has 13 days of campaigning left. On today's show, with the nation so clearly divided, we ask, will the US election be free and fair, or is it headed back to the courts? And don't forget, you can take part with your questions on this show. You can also visit www.livestation.com for an easy download of a video player. You can tune into Al Jazeera English and click on the chat room where you can send your comments and questions in real time. Hope you'll join us for that. But joining us for this discussion from New York is investigative journalist Greg Palast, who authored the New York Times bestseller Armed Madhouse and also The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. His most recent project is a comic voter guide co-authored with Robert Kennedy Jr., Steal Back Your Vote. Mr. Palast argues that the 2008 presidential election may already have been stolen and Americans have to take their votes back. Also joining us is David Freddoso, the reporter for the conservative National Review magazine and author of The Case Against Barack Obama. Mr. Freddoso is concerned that fraudulent voter registration could be a real threat to the 2008 election. Gentlemen, I welcome you to the program.
Thanks for having me, Riz.
Well, Greg Palast, if I could start with you. Good to have you with us. Greg, if I could start with you there. You don't think there's much scope for a fair and free election this time around. Why is that?
It's already stolen. Here's what's going on, okay? We've had Republican elections officials purging the voter rolls, draining the voter rolls of legitimate voters, very silently, with no one noticing. For example, the Republican Secretary of State of Colorado, Donetta Davidson is the woman's name, drained 19.4%. That's 1 in 5 voters off the voter rolls. Their names just went poof. In New Mexico, that's the big swing state, Colorado. New Mexico, 1 in 9 voters, boof, their names are missing. And it's not just any voters. I went statistically through the rolls, who is missing from the voter rolls in New Mexico. The darker skinned the voter, Hispanic or Native American, indigenous, the darker skinned the voter, the more likely your name will be removed from the voter rolls. It's a racial purge. We've seen it before. Back in 2000, I reported how Katherine Harris knocked off tens of thousands of black people off the voter rolls. She called them felons, criminals, not allowed to vote, but they were all innocent, every one. Their only crime was voting while black, and that's how they stole the presidency of 2000. Now they've taken the Florida methods, and the Republicans have run them across the country. I'm not a Democrat. I'm just a reporter for BBC and Rolling Stone, and I'm just telling you what I'm uncovering here.
All right. Well, Greg, we'll get on to some of the reasons that you see behind that in a moment. Let me get David Freddoso in and see it from your perspective. Now, I know you also feel there is a problem with the vote, but have a different perspective on it.
Yes. Well, first of all, I was unaware that you could tell by looking at someone's name whether they were black or white, but when it comes to the classical method of voter fraud is to have a lot of people on the rolls who are dead, who've moved out of state, who are known they will not show up on election day, and that then someone can come in their place and say, I'm so-and-so, and vote in their place. And it's very hard to know when that has happened. There have been cases, though, where people who've been dead or people who are registered to vote in 2 different states and vote in both, Florida and New York. There are a few people who were caught doing that in the last presidential election. This kind of thing does happen, and it's appropriate to purge the voter rolls of people who move away, who die. In some states, you can't vote if you've committed a felony, and so your name is removed after that. It's not. It is appropriate to do some purging, but the worry that a lot of people have is that there are groups such as the Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now, ACORN, running around the country and submitting lots of voter registrations for people who don't appear to exist or who have obviously jocular names or that sort of thing. And when that happens, you just never know why is this being done? There are some hints as to why, but it's something that does damage the integrity of the process.
David, let me quote from your book on that issue of Acorn. And this is a sort of chunk of text that's taken out in that your book, The Case Against Barack Obama. Acorn is a left-wing group that has affected social change through intimidating public officials. Acorn uses taxpayer money to conduct these activities. Its members boast that they have played a key role in Obama's election campaigns. Now, on what scale do you think that action is having an impact? I mean, Greg has talked about 19.1, I think it was, percent of voters being purged in one area. Is there anything comparable here with Acorn?
Well, you know, we're talking about, depending on the state, just to give a couple of examples, in Washington State, King County of Washington State, which is where Seattle is, I believe that something along the lines of, was it in Kansas City, I believe 97% of the forms they submitted were fraudulent. No, I'm sorry, that was King County. In Kansas City, it was something like more like 40%. There ended up being 12 convictions in the 2006 election of Acorn employees in Missouri. A lot of people believe there isn't necessarily as much malice as just sheer disrespect for the process. The Acorn's model is to tell their employees, whom they underpay in a way that their own campaigns for the living wage would never tolerate, but they tell them, well, you give us this many new voters every day or you're fired. And the result is that people go out and sign up Jive Turkey to vote, and, you know, whoever, just names that obviously are not real people. Mickey Mouse, the entire starting lineup of the Dallas Cowboys was registered to vote in Nevada by Acorn employees. And they continue to show that sort of disrespect for the process. And I think what people are most offended by is the fact that this group has received at least $31 million in taxpayer funding over the last 8 years, and that you know, that this funding continues, that we're being forced basically to pay for the degrading of our election process, whether or not we know how many actual fraudulent votes are cast.
I'll ask you more about that in a second, but let me get Greg Palast back into this. Greg, the numbers, the proportions you're talking about of purging that takes place, and I read your article in Rolling Stone with Robert Kennedy Jr., the numbers seem to be huge. I mean, the percentages seem to be huge.
They are astonishingly huge, but I really can't let David get away with what he says. I've been on television reporter for many years. I've never heard someone say so many lies into a camera in my entire career. It's a scurrilous attack on Acorn, and you're going to have to take it back and apologize, David. It is dead wrong. I have gone to your GOP buddies and said, show me the names of the fraudulent voters, okay, and we will check them out. I can tell you something. David Iglesias, United States prosecutor, got 100 names from the Republican Party that supposedly Acorn registered fraudulently. He said he ran all over the mesas of New Mexico, didn't find one single voter, one single fraudulent voter, and he refused to make up prosecutions against them. He was fired. David Iglesias is a Republican. He is a strong McCain supporter, but he said the Republicans are stealing this election through a false cry of voter fraud. Now, keep this in mind. This is very important. You've mentioned names. You talked about 6 people who were convicted in Missouri. Those
12 actually,
were thrown
Greg.
out.
12 people were convicted. It was a state conviction by a Democratic state attorney general. So you might want to get that straight as well.
Okay, let's get this straightened out. We have not had, in the United States of America, there are 178 million voters. We've had 24 people convicted of voter fraud. You talk about people stealing voter theft identities. I haven't found a single case in New Mexico, a single case in Indiana where they've changed the law. Not one single case. You keep making these charges. You keep charging Acorn. It's an absolute stone cold lie, and it's a racial attack.
There's no dispute that many
voters.
of the names submitted were fake names. I mean,
Give me
there's no
the
disputing
names.
That.
Okay,
Give
gentlemen.
me, no. Where are these illegal voters? Let me tell you something. Your group, the Republican Party, gave me a list. I said, give me your worst cases. We checked them out. Robert Kennedy and we did an investigation.
I think our worst case is the 1960 election of JFK, where the state of Illinois was stolen by, entire cemeteries voting twice. We just don't want that to happen again.
All right, gents,
that was half a century ago.
All right, gents, I'm going to get a viewer question
now.
here.
Yes, and hopefully we've learned some of the lessons.
David, give us a second. We're going to get to Farah on the phone from London. We try and give our viewers a chance to ask questions here. We'll get your responses in a sec, but let's get to Farah on the phone from London with a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, my question is that, I mean, whatever the accusation you have made in your book, what would you think if, Senator Barack Obama wins by a landslide,
Okay.
what do you think when you wake up on November 5th?
Okay, the question was basically, your case against Barack Obama in your book, David. What the viewer Tefera is saying is, if he wins by a landslide victory, then really, how can you justify what you're saying?
Oh, well, I mean, if he wins by a landslide, he wins by a landslide. This election may very well not be close enough that, election fraud, at most, if you imagine the worst case scenario, you might have, I mean, Kennedy had to make it close even to steal that election, the Illinois electoral votes anyway. If it's not even close, then sure, cheating isn't going to matter so much.
We've got a caller from Paris on the line. Let's get our viewer in Paris on the line. Go ahead.
Good evening, Mr. Khan.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us, Juliana.
Thank you very much. Yes, my question is this. Come election day, Republicans apparently win because they have frauded and stolen the elections in advance. And so the decision goes to court. We've seen America before actually impose themselves on African countries where they have interest. We had a scenario. I'm a Kenyan. And actually we had Condoleezza Rice and Kofi Annan out there negotiating after the elections that apparently they claimed that my president stole, which wasn't the case. Okay. In this case, apart from the court deciding, what I would like to know is, will they let other countries now come to intervene the same way they intervene in Africa after elections, because they go everywhere.
Juliana, that's a very interesting point. Let me get this to Greg Palast. It's interesting. America wants to be part of the international community, checking everyone else's the free and fairness of other votes, but no one seems to check on America.
Well, in fact, I find that shameless by the diplomatic community. In Florida, and I think even David will agree, we had thousands of black voters removed from the voter rolls, and George Bush stole the White House. It's an unelected junta that's there. I mean, that's just straight, cold fact. If that happened in the Ukraine, you wouldn't accept it. When it happened in Peru, you didn't accept it. It happens in Florida, where you had an election run by the candidate's brother, Jeb Bush, who literally stopped people with dark skin from voting. And that stole the White House. We saw it again in Ohio. We're seeing it right now. And by the way, the big attack right now is against people with Islamic names, because we have part of the purge that's going on, and part of the attack on names are people, for example, with the name Muhammad, which is in English spelt many different ways, causing a problem. They're saying that there's any mismatch or respelling of the name, you lose your vote. And I just spoke to the Secretary of State, the election official in California, and she said that the attack on the Islamic name voters has been very, very serious, caused tens of thousands of voters, and we know why that's happening. George Bush won a lot of those votes in 2000. Now he's not winning any.
All right.
It's deliberate, it's cold-blooded, it's racial, it's nasty, but the only thing we can do...
So the Democrats are clearing Muslims off the voter rolls in California, you're telling me? I mean, they do have a Democratic Secretary of State. I mean, everyone...
She's trying to get them back on. Okay.
All right, let me ask.
The Republican Secretary of State took them off.
Greg, let me ask David one thing. You
wait, that would have had to have been years ago.
No, that was just, my friend. There was a Republican Secretary of State in California 2 years ago. Look, in America, we're not going to expect an invasion from other countries to save our democracy.
Okay.
We're going to have to steal it back.
Listen,
I agree with that.
We've got a caller on the line. We're going to get the question. Gents, I'm going to touch on this a bit more, but let's get our caller's question. Karora, let's have your question before we take a break, and we'll get to the answer afterwards. What would you like to ask? Go ahead.
Yes, the question is, well, we know George Bush wasn't a qualified president last general election. Today we've got the Obama, at the same time McCain. The question is, do you think America, there will be an election of, a fair election, democracy, there will be election of, freedom, because I really don't believe what's going to happen this election, because we want Obama, and I'm sure Obama is a global leader, not an American leader.
We're going to try and get to that when we get back from the break. We've got to pause here, but our discussion on US voter fraud will continue in just a moment. Don't go away.